Welcome to Shadows of Arklay, the Origins of A Madhouse, a 4-part deep dive into the forgotten and shadowy origins of one of Resident Evil's most infamous locations. This series uncovers the Arklay Mansion's true purpose, not just a summer home for Umbrella's elite, but a secret stronghold for twisted eugenics experiments and genetic manipulation long before S.T.A.R.S ever set foot there. This podcast series offers more than what the games reveal. Arklay Mansion holds layers of secrets and lore way beyond what the games give you. Buried truths uncovered here through careful examination of the established canon, files and real-world sources strung together with a dash of creative license to create a story of the most twisted house in the Resident Evil universe. In the last episode, the grand opening, we discovered the origins of the Arklay Mansion, its dark construction and the hidden purpose behind this twisted house. In this episode, we discover the beginnings of the Umbrella Corporation and how we go from Progenitor to the T-Virus. Along the way, we discover into deplorable experiments conducted beneath Arklay, the betrayals and backstabbings in the boardrooms, and the search for the ultimate bioweapon conducted by the dream team of Spencer, Birkin and Albert Wesker. Welcome back to the Shadows of Arklay, Origins of A Madhouse. This is episode 2, Umbrella's Decades of Horror. Part 1. Umbrella Out of the Shadows. It is January 1968 in the American Midwest. Deep snow covers the entirety of the Arklay Mountains, the Spencer Mansion complex. Luckily for the residents of the estate, they have the backing of a gigantic powerhouse and the hot water never fails them, and they don't experience a single blackout. Lord Spencer's loyal butler, Nicholas Dean, and his son, Patrick, welcomed Spencer's friend, who needed to be driven in due to poor flying conditions. Spencer is delighted to see him, not only because he is likely to be his only friend, but Spencer doesn't mix often with his employees, so the company is more than welcome. They do what they always do after a while apart. They walk and talk around the Arklay Mansion, through every corridor, and rest at the beautiful gardens. Adam, my dear friend, the time is now to take our project away from here for good. There will be soon a company I have to run, and there will be more and more people here at Arklay on company business. I do not want them to mix. Nobody knows your real name here, but it's about to get busier. So I want you to go in around the world, and I want you to build yourself a team. Of all the people I've met on my journey, let me make it clear you have been a true friend. I want you to be there when I become a god. But as sad as it is, this might be the last time we see each other face to face, or at the very least here at Arklay. Ozzy, we both knew this day would come. It is always a pleasure visiting here, so I'll be sad about that, but it is what it is. I brought with me my updated list and observations. I think you'll be pleased with a couple in particular. One of them, as luck would have it, is a local boy. Great work, Adam. Let the others play around with creating these monsters and viral killing machines. They just don't see the vision. But I will admit, I am very intrigued with the idea of having a virus that could control the population. This would cleanse the world ready for my children. A novel idea. It is a shame it has to be that way, as I'm sure your team would take great interest in the virus we've been working on for the children. From what I gather, they are decades behind in their research. Indeed they are, Adam. Anyway, let us finish our tour of the estate and work up an appetite. I've got some chefs already busy preparing your favourite. This conversation was the last Project Wesker activity in Arklay. No documents were ever kept, and no Wesker files would ever touch Umbrella's future databases. Even the staff of the complex never knew Adam's name or what exactly he did, just as they planned it. Later that month, Spencer calls Marcus and Edward to Arklay to formalise the idea of the Umbrella Corporation. This would be the last time the three of them were in the same place, at the same time. The premise and plan was simple. Spencer and Ashford's personal wealth was at risk if it was connected to their Progenitor experiments, and it was not infinite. Marcus was essentially living off their funds. Spencer proposed combining the wealth, rewarding Marcus with a director's role, and then use this wealth to attract investors and plunder the pharmaceutical market, which was growing and projected to grow wildly. This independent wealth would then be used to legitimately fund their viral research. Edward kept quiet, but was more or less complicit. He was busy with his son Alexander, and more money wouldn't exactly be a bad thing. He knew better than anyone this was a handout their family could not refuse, or else they will be left behind. Edward is unexpectedly honest that he is not as rich as Spencer. So after investing in the shares, there's not a huge amount left, but he is nevertheless on board. However, on the subject of the day-to-day running of a pharmaceutical company, he was not interested. He feels out of his depth there. This is perfect for Spencer, as it opens the doorway to being the majority shareholder from day one and having the most power in boardroom decisions. Something that would be of extreme importance again and again in this story. Edward has a request, however. He has been working in the European labs and the South Pole Transport Terminal, but wants to expand it to be a modernised one. He has used his own money so far. He says the transport terminal element could be used for the company. Spencer, noting the money comment, agrees instantly to appease him. On the other hand, Marcus was indifferent because they had solved progenitor cultivation. He felt he was the only one bothered by it, but ultimately delighted to hear his research can continue, but unable to see the bigger picture that Spencer was painting. Neither Edward nor Marcus would ever realise just how much of a master manipulator Spencer was until it was too late. As usual, they enjoy a meal in the dining room. Gentlemen, I want to make something clear to you here. Pharmaceuticals will be the main way for Umbrella to make money, but I still have absolute faith, as always, in your direction and guidance with Progenitor. I think we will change the world with it, but we've got to be realistic with what we need to make that happen. That is why I'm doing this, if you two had any doubts. I will take care of ensuring you will have the best people and equipment to do so. Lyndon Johnson's Medicaid is good for Big Pharma. More people will want drugs, and we will make it for them. But we will be regulated. There will be red tape, and there will always be a need for secrecy. If you can trust me on this, I will repay your faith in double. I have contacted some people who are agreeable and ready to join us, and we are willing to buy out smaller labs which make medicine and are already regulated. Our mutual friend Henry wants in, and then we have a large lab in France. They are aware of the idea of Progenitor from your loose lips, Marcus, so we will have some friendly competition over there, I'm sure. We will not share any of our data until we have acquired them, but Dr. Henry's repaid your secrets in kind, and he'll let me know about some fascinating parasites they've been working on that you two might be interested in. Marcus and Edward may fall for Spencer's deceit, but they are not gullible or stupid. They are well aware that the future is bright in Big Pharma, and everything Spencer has told them, more or less, is the actual truth. He will honour his promise to make Umbrella one of the biggest corporations in the world, and he will keep funding both Edward and Marcus's research. An office in Chicago is swiftly purchased, as are other locations around Europe, which create simple drugs such as aspirin, paracetamol and insulin cheaply. Arklay Mansion is a small operation in comparison to other future locations, and Spencer wants to keep it that way. He plans to have the company's headquarters in Berlin, Germany, and the USA headquarters in Chicago. Spencer instructs Edward to just carry on the way he is, and he is looking forward to seeing the redesigned transport terminal. Spencer knows how important Marcus is, doesn't hesitate to stroke his ego and comment on the training facility and the bright stars they are creating. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Spencer plants moles within every intake. The three men finish their meals, all three of them very pleased with themselves and the future ahead. Both Edward and Marcus stay the night at Arklay, sleeping soundly, pleased with themselves to be a part of Umbrella, and all three at the same time telling themselves that their work will one day lead to them to be able to take control of Umbrella. On April of 1968, the evil corporation Umbrella was now officially out of the shadows, and it was worldwide. Part 2. Highs and Lows. After the incredible highs of founding Umbrella, Spencer is dismayed at Arklay. The old British aristocrat has started likening their work to pottering. The current chief researcher, Sean, is nowhere near the calibre of Marcus or even Edward, and as the collaboration from other labs to Arklay is less than stellar. This means that if the team at Arklay aren't innovating, they aren't going anywhere. However, Spencer is not overly concerned. He didn't have high hopes to begin with. He was at Arklay because he genuinely loved the place, not because he was expecting miracles from his team. Deep down, he was always expecting someone else to come up with a brilliant idea and he would just steal it and hand it over to Arklay. He wonders if Sean and his team could even do that. Wesker is making some great strides with observation. Their own private virus is more or less a waiting game. This experimental virus would spend its entire existence being a total enigma to almost everyone on Earth. Spencer spends most of his time in his private study, writing his doctrine, which he feeds privately to Wesker whenever they touch base. This is a doctrine which is subliminally implanted within the hearts and minds of the Wesker children. How they did that still to this day remains a secret. His mole sends him a telegram from Ashford's lab and explains how the father and son duo have had discussions about genetics. They believe there are people who simply have superior genes. They believe their own ancestor is one of them, Veronica. So for a split second, Spencer wondered if the Ashfords had somehow caught wind of Project Wesker and simply doing it their own way. Either way, this won't stand. Spencer aims to clear his mind. Takes a trip around Arklay complex as he does most days. He is astonished that the team he has assembled are incompetent, and everyone else in the company he is bankrolling is steaming ahead of him. He might wield the power in Umbrella, but this won't stop the board making jokes about Arklay. He was tragically aware of his shortcomings as an actual scientist, who could not go toe-to-toe with Edward and Marcus. As leader of a team, he was simply too selfish to delegate and micromanage. His team spent plotting in the shadows had cost him already, and he needed to stop the rot in this arms race. He wanders through the dining room, where a couple of workers are having their breakfasts. They are David and Mike, who are working on the tech infrastructure, making good progress on the camera system throughout the house. The only downside is that it needed constant monitoring. Videotapes would of course not be available until the early 1970s, hard drive cassettes big enough until the late 1970s. If something was happening and no one was watching, there was no evidence. He laughed to himself, made a rare joke to David and Mike that Sean and the team were not doing anything worth watching. Next, he wanders into the lounge, where a couple of researchers couldn't wait to tell him about some breakthroughs with the coloured herbs. They've been able to begin growing them quickly in the greenhouse and around the gardens themselves. They've been able to use a microscopic amount of Progenitor along with a paste of green herb to make wounds heal incredibly fast. We're still working on the red and blue versions to determine if they do anything at all, but we think we'd be able to make a world-class product using the green. We've been doing all sorts of tests, and the green herb can visibly repair small lacerations in hours. Not only that, it's got pretty powerful pain relieving properties. It's an incredible herb. What luck to find it right here in Arklay. The tiny amount of Progenitor amplifies the power of the herb, and it's that element which makes the medicinal properties bond to the patient. We tried overdosing a plant a couple of times and the thing didn't stop growing, but it ultimately died so the work is on hold. We believe that this plant could make a real difference in everyday lives if we could just crack how to mass cultivate the herbs themselves. They don't grow that fast and they aren't as big as we would like, so we can't scale. We're interviewing some herbologists to see if we can try and make these plants bigger and more potent. Maybe, if the Progenitor team make a less potent virus, we could use that too. Spencer is delighted. This is exactly what he was after, and even better, it's an Arklay-made product. However, he wasn't too keen on herbologists coming on board with noble causes in the same building as Progenitor. He makes a mental note to speak with the head of security on how to segregate certain access levels. He goes down into the labs. He sees horrifically mutated guinea pigs, rats, and mice with bodies piling up. Spencer is enraged and gives them a good ticking off. Tells them to stop messing around and go back to doing theory work. No more tests until they bring him something concrete, that the next test will do something. He makes another note to create a proper disposal system, either here or elsewhere. He goes to check up on the poor wretch, Lisa Trevor, the horrific suffering merely existing at this point, permanently stuck to the bed. But what a marvel. She is seemingly immortal. He thinks to himself how terrible the Progenitor virus really is, and for a split second wonders why on earth they're doing this. Why not create a profitable company and Project Wesker and just leave it at that? Is it too late now? Yes, he thought, it was. Umbrella is a two-sided coin. On the one hand, he sees what the pharmaceutical team are doing and the delight, but on the other hand, the Progenitor teams have hurt everything they've touched. In the next intake of students in April 1968, Marcus's training facility, he has intercepted the group before they go. He plants another mole with Edward, who are unaware of the identity of the existing moles. Spencer takes an incredibly rare trip to the caves because Henry Yates, who is the resident pest control, has asked for a meeting. He notes that when trying to dispose of some of the failed but still alive specimens, they do not die easily. Spencer sees one up close, caged, inflamed red eyes, skin hanging off, ready to kill anything and everything. Absolutely lethal as a weapon, but a liability to Arklay if they were to escape. Spencer makes arrangements to ship out some specimens to a special branch locally, and that routes will be created to facilitate this. He also notes that he will make arrangements for special weapons to be created designed to incapacitate these sorts of creatures. Henry asks Spencer what on earth those doctors are doing, to which Spencer simply says he doesn't know, but some good will come of it eventually. It was some time before Spencer ever set foot in those caves again. Part 3. Code Veronica. It's now May 1968. The wheels of Umbrella are turning, and they are turning fast. Spencer is finding himself on the phone non-stop in his Arklay study, and often has to travel out to take care of corporate business to his annoyance. He loves the Arklay estate. Spencer receives a coded update from his mole Robert Gregor in the Antarctic and is aghast to find Edward and Alexander working with Progenitor at speed and with decent results. He hears the foggy plans that we know today as Code Veronica, not to be confused with the virus T. Veronica. Robert is an excellent mole, and he knows to keep his distance, but he doesn't know the full details and knows it's more important to keep cover than it is to know the specifics. Robert, like everyone, does not know how similar this so-called Veronica plan is to Project Wesker, and doesn't have the urgency to report, and as far as he is concerned, this is purely friendly competition. Lord Spencer doesn't believe that this dream of theirs is in fact superior to Wesker. Of course it isn't. But his fear lies in the speed of research and the prospect of scale. Spencer lusts for power above all else, and he can't be seen by the board to be constantly one-upped by his peers. Spencer believes it will be the late 1990s when Project W comes alive, where the children will be mature enough, physically and mentally, to evolve with the experimental virus, whereas the Ashfords could create a superior being as early as the 80s. There might not be a world to inherit for his children. Spencer orders Robert to act and plan immediately. He does not tempt fate. Make it look like an accident. Try and make it look like carelessness on behalf of Alexander. During a routine experiment in July 1968, Edward is killed after being injected or infected with Progenitor in an accidental spill. This lab was only accessible by Edward and Alexander, as detailed in Alexander's note. He blames himself, and Robert's plan was a success. In 1968, Spencer gains more shares. Alexander is easily swayed to relinquish some of his shares for personal capital, with Spencer gaslighting his fears that it was his fault. Accidents happen in our risky line of work, Spencer would say. February 1969. Alexander Ashford requests company funding for a new research base and living quarters at the transport terminal, wanting to incorporate elements of Arklay's architectural style. Spencer isn't the only admirer of Arklay. Spencer is quick to back the idea and pushes it through the board with ease. His support comes with conditions. Surveillance equipment will be installed, and ownership will pass fully to Umbrella. Otherwise, they are fully independent, in the same way that Chicago is, and Europe. While the facility's purpose lies outside of Arklay's remit, Spencer views it as another step in tightening his grip on the company. At Arklay, work is moving at full speed. The pharmaceutical division thrives, producing formulas in-house before sending them to Chicago and Berlin for mass production. Umbrella Pharmaceuticals has Berlin set as its headquarters, now firmly in the remit of the Henry family, the company's foremost pharmaceutical experts. Spencer, for a change, has an excellent working relationship with the European branch as a whole. The Arklay team cracks the blue herb's anti-venom properties, but curiosity soon pushes scientists into dangerous territory. Insect experiments lead to disturbing mutations, some of which escape into the mansion grounds and beyond. Security teams eventually contain the threat, with green mixtures proving unexpectedly useful. The incident shows just how quickly control can slip. At this time, T-virus leaks were non-existent, another reason why Alexander blamed himself. Infected specimens simply died very quickly if not hunted down and killed. Meanwhile, Lisa Trevor remains an unsettling constant. Still alive, still impossibly resilient, and still reacting violently to female caretakers, she was now handled only by male staff. Spencer often reflects on her condition, privately aware that if she escaped, Arklay would have neither the manpower nor the weaponry to really bring her down. Another distraction that Spencer can never quite nip in the bud. Robert had been surprisingly quiet, with reports often stating no update. And then suddenly in 1971, Alexander announces that Alexia and Alfred are born. Spencer is astonished, and Robert had absolutely no idea. Robert never saw a woman near Alexander, let alone for 9 months. How? Spencer is enraged at being blindsided and ultimately beaten in the sense that something had happened without his knowledge. As Spencer often does when angry, he takes a trip around his glorious mansion. He goes to the balcony which overlooks the front and sees Jonathan, who is visiting from Chicago. He is the sales rep for Umbrella USA and has come to take a look at an aspirin-based product they are working on using a green herb and apparently a virus. He says he actually tried it while suffering from a cold and it was as if he was vaccinated. Spencer walks him down to the first floor greenhouse so that Jonathan can see Umbrella grow them naturally. Might help with his sales pitch. Jonathan notes he wishes he could actually see the lab and see how it's all made. Spencer says unfortunately, due to contamination concerns, only select people get to go down there. Jonathan doesn't bother arguing. He's visited a couple of times now, and it was the same story when he visited Europe and Antarctica. Spencer rarely shows his hand. But in 1971, Spencer tries to arrange Alexander to visit Arklay to discuss weapon development as a ruse. Spencer arranges Dr. Wesker to receive a DNA sample to compare with the Wesker children, if he gets a chance. Alexander finally accepts in 1972. Alexander reveals absolutely nothing to Spencer. Spencer's mole knows absolutely nothing, but Spencer is adamant something unnatural has occurred here. He reads Adam Wesker's report, which compares the twins' results with his Wesker children. He believes that Alfred and Alexia have more in common with the freaks in his laboratory basement than the Wesker children, but there are certainly crossovers in genetics. In summary, Alexia and Alfred are in fact clones of their family ancestor, Veronica. What on earth has Alexander been up to? How are these Ashford twins not freak shows themselves? Wesker calls Spencer on a private line while Alexander rested. In my simulations, exposure to the virus will likely kill, or at the very least, transform the twins into grotesque monsters. But they are young and we just don't have enough data. They will likely grow to be gifted and intelligent children, but still normal children. We have nothing to worry about. This is a vanity project, probably because Alexander fears that once he's gone, you will get the rest of the shares and the Ashford name and family line will just die. However, I think it will be useful to the company on how the cloning process went, and maybe we can clone the Wesker children when they become adults. Spencer grasped in the short conversation he's had with Wesker and then Alexander that he is no gifted scientist like Marcus and Edward, and the twins won't amount to much on their own. Alexander just as much confirms this by downplaying his own talents and putting an awful lot of faith in Alexia and Alfred, who at this point were just babies. Was Spencer doing the same with his Wesker children? Alexander's game is given away when pressed on progress with the Progenitor, which was little to none. Spencer's unease fizzled away, and the rest of Alexander's visit remained pleasant and cordial. Sure, these kids will be geniuses, but you need more than that in the new world. Part 4. The Long Game. It's late 1972, and a few years have rolled by quickly for Umbrella and the Arklay team. As a corporation, they've experienced rapid expansion and notable investors. Branches worldwide, Arklay within the corporate structure is just a number, and an insignificant one at that, exactly as Spencer wanted. Spencer ensures the company joins and spearheads the Global Pharmaceutical Consortium, which is an agreement between all participants to share research when it comes to medicine for the benefit of mankind. The irony is not lost on him. Members of the consortium would unwittingly and indirectly help fund bioweapon research, helping Umbrella innovate and thrive in the pharmaceutical market. Between 1972 and 1976, his Arklay team are still in the dark ages compared with the likes of Marcus and even the European branch. Monstrosities are still a mess. 15% of the tested animals survive, and those which survive mutate and become wildly aggressive. Nowhere near being classified as any kind of BOW. Progenitor Type B becomes Type C and so on, but it may as well have not existed as it was poor. Progenitor was a complicated beast and no one seemed to be able to crack at Arklay. And the problem with the Arklay team is that they didn't have a clear idea of what they were trying to achieve. The researchers were skilled in virology, but viruses which existed, not how to make anything new. A small success elsewhere was the development of anti-BOW weapons. They made short work on dealing with the stubborn experiments which refused to die, and the Arklay security team were glad. As for the political sphere, related to Umbrella, President Lyndon Johnson was great for big pharmaceutical companies, and arguably Richard Nixon was even better. The United States was, and still is, the biggest market for big pharmaceutical companies, but during the 1970s Umbrella also became the top player in the European Union, of which it had a large physical presence. 100% of Umbrella's revenue was regular pharmaceuticals, and now that the boardroom was filling up and shareholder wishes needed to be met, Progenitor research was more often than not any other business. So far, the Arklay team have been working on mostly rodents, insects and small fish in the aqua ring. Grotesque killing machines, but a short lifespan that are likely to kill whatever is in front of them, friend or foe. Spencer was not really pushing the Arklay team forward. He had his Wesker children and was somewhat content, but Marcus was becoming increasingly restless. He had said all along that being rich meant nothing to him. All he wanted was to be left alone to work. So, in the late 1976, during a Berlin HQ shareholder meeting, Marcus brings up the prospect of human testing, which was on everyone's mind, but uncomfortable nonetheless. It is, of course, denied. Spencer waited to vote last, as he would have been in favour if all else were. He knows, and has always known, that if any breakthroughs were to be made with Progenitor, it would be through Marcus, but he wasn't going to stick his neck out at personal risk for him. Marcus then asks for samples of Ebola, which was recently discovered. This is tentatively approved by the board, but there is an unspoken apprehension on giving Marcus such a lethal weapon. Ebola infected people quickly and killed people even quicker. The board says that until Progenitor can be stabilised and test subjects are more responsive, then samples will be limited. Marcus offers the board a paper on how he believes he can use Ebola with Progenitor to do just that. Spencer notes this. Perhaps it will be of use in the future. But the board both stroke Marcus's ego by saying he's the best, but also offers a backhanded compliment by suggesting he goes back to the drawing board and look beyond mammals and insects. There is absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind the genius of James Marcus. Marcus has started to work with annelids, and this board meeting meant he had to double down and put all of his eggs in one basket with them. Spencer had really hoped Marcus would have come up with something that he could have stolen, and then his team at Arklay could continue it. Once back at Arklay, Spencer goes to the living room to converse with his current head researcher, Ronald. Surely there's something they can do. Now that most of our pharmaceutical endeavours have been moved elsewhere, and we import more than we export, I think we should think about working on Progenitor as our sole purpose. But Mr. Spencer, I have to be honest with you, the team I'm leading are not on par with the rest of the company. With your permission, I'd like to start firing and hiring. I agree, Ronald. Work with me and the security team and we'll get this done. Also, and I hope you don't think I'm out of line, but there's also a morale issue from us all having to be always living and breathing this building. I'd like it as an incentive for new staff, that they can leave the grounds when not in work. Security team permitted, of course. Yes, Ronald, I am also in agreement. You and I both know I've never been keen on people wandering around the mansion. I'll speak with the security team to make this happen for you as well. Spencer agrees to relax these rules and allow staff to live in Raccoon and surrounding areas if they desired, but the most senior members to be on site. He himself had already worked quite a vast network of connections in Raccoon, including senior officials in City Hall. Raccoon itself was flourishing thanks to the influence of umbrella money, with a great many donated freely, and the fact that Raccoon was seen as the original home of the now world-famous pharmaceutical company. They even had a couple of sales offices in town, as well as pharmacy dispensaries. To make all of this work to be both public and secret at the same time, effectively hiding in plain sight, Spencer created the Umbrella Security Service, USS for short, who would have detailed files of every employee to keep an eye on their assets in Raccoon and elsewhere. They would work like a private military service for many years, but would allow Arklay to be much more flexible with hiring and for cleaners if a problem needed fixing. The idea was then proposed to the board and rolled out worldwide. The USS would be used all the way until Umbrella's destruction. Part 5. Wesker and Birkin. It's now 1977, a decade on. Spencer, Ronald, and the Umbrella executives attached to the Progenitor project have been keeping an eye on their competition and headhunting where they could. Colleges, schools for gifted children, and universities across the world were being tapped up for the best and brightest. If they still needed some more specialist education, they'd be invited to the management facility. Ellen Smith is one success story. A young researcher was a particularly bright consultant they brought in who showed a great interest in virology and had sailed through the management facility during the 1976 intake. Arklay is about to get serious when it comes to Progenitor research, but the number of overall staff was relatively low and will forever be relatively low to the size of the lab. Arklay's existence in Raccoon is not so much of a secret. It's public knowledge that this is an executive retreat that holds conferences for their employees and a summer home for its CEO. Otherwise, it's just a mansion. Nothing to see here. Let's take a moment to be clear about Umbrella in 1977. and indeed for the entire 20 years of this episode, and separate it from what we now know in hindsight. They, Umbrella, were a global powerhouse in pharmaceuticals, a household name. They create products people use day to day, and they do provide genuinely life-saving medicines, antibiotics, medical equipment, you name it, and they will do it. As far as the public is concerned, they benefit humanity. They are respected and very successful. Many of the good that they do takes place in the same building as their BOW research. For every one scientist working on Progenitor, they had 10 working on cancer research. Arklay, right now, was not that important to Umbrella. They were not making much headway with Progenitor still, and the commercial arm really was the area Spencer was spending most of his time on. Spencer was revered in the company. He not only came up with the idea in the first place, but his business acumen and shrewd decision making has made many people, including himself, filthy rich in the company. But we're at a very crucial period in Umbrella's story here. If you thought some of the things that Arklay have come up with was dark, it is about to get a whole lot worse. Because in mid-1977, a 15-year-old child prodigy by the name of William Birkin applies for the management training facility run by James Marcus. He has been headhunted early on and piqued the interest of the company's darker side through his theories on human evolution. Birkin, as opposed to Marcus, thinks there exists a virus that would change the host through forced evolution, as opposed to the host being predetermined to be able to handle it. Marcus was still obsessed with Progenitor being a killing machine that would weed out the population, leaving only the superhumans left. An agent of Umbrella, whose role it is to find these prodigies, pour fresh water, planted the seed that Umbrella was the company to take this theory forward, and offered him a scholarship. At 15, Birkin writes a brilliant paper labelled Mankind's Next Step, and he believes that nature creates new pandemics to force humans to take their next steps, and that through constant innovations in vaccines we may be preventing it. It is a ghastly thought, even more so coming from a young boy. Spencer jumps at the chance to bring him to the management training facility. He asks Ronald for his thoughts on the paper deep in the bowels of the Arklay complex. I've got to say, it is incredible that Birkin has come to these conclusions. His theories are absolutely sound, and you can tell that if we told him about Progenitor Type D and some of the experiments we've done, he might just crack it for us. Spencer replies, "Indeed, to come up with this using publicly available data reminds me of the genius of Marcus, but we know how that went. Did you tell him anything about Progenitor?" Ronald says, "I agree, but Marcus is his own man. William is only 15 and so young enough to be mentored that he may not end up the same way. His section of the paper on concerns was the smallest part. He comes across as reckless. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but he didn't seem to consider the dangers of his ideas. I didn't tell him about Progenitor, but I made it abundantly clear that we are the world's leading company on viruses, and that seemed enough." Spencer, contemplating, responds, "Okay, and I agree. I noticed the same. I think we need to pick him up and put him in the management facility with Marcus and keep an eye on him, pair him with someone a little level-headed. We need these sorts of minds at Arklay. No more mediocrity." In the very same intake is another prodigy of a different kind, Albert Wesker, a local boy of Raccoon. One of the first children marked by Project Wesker many years ago, one of the chosen ones to lead the new world. Spencer knew everything there was to know about Albert Wesker. Pre-vetted and already interested in biology, eugenics and viruses. Devilishly intelligent, an exceptional athlete. Popular with people from all walks of life, extremely ambitious, cool-headed and practical. Curiously, his caseworkers, who were directed by Dr. Wesker, noted he never really questioned his birth or his parents. He seemed over it. The official story, as far as he is aware, is that he was adopted but otherwise lived a normal life. To him, a normal life, but to anyone else, he was raised to have the best education money could buy, lived in Spencer Foundation-sponsored houses, never wanting for anything. We, of course, know that he was subliminally conditioned in a controlled environment being fed by Project W, according to Spencer's doctrine, written in his private study at Arklay. He gives Adam a call. Are the preparations complete for Albert? Yes, they are. Out of all the Wesker children, he has been one of the first to show an interest in biology, along with Alex, and I believe he is seeking you out without realizing it, just like she did. Excellent. I can't tell you how much I am looking forward to this. The other children are coming along nicely, but to have one seek me out so early is a thrill. Indeed it is, but I must give you caution, Oswell. Not all of the children will make it. It is a numbers game. So keep a distance and don't put all your faith in just one. There will be others, even if they don't seek you out just yet. Oh, I know, don't worry. Believe it or not, there is another young boy in the same intake who I've also got my eye on to keep me occupied. Both Wesker and Birkin were about to embark on an intense year of studying, with them both hoping to change the world in their own way. Their destiny was at Arklay Mansion, but not yet. Umbrella, since their foundation, had always had a dark side. But little did the world know, or even Spencer, that the darkest era was just around the corner. Was it Umbrella who enticed these two to give in to their darkest ideas? Or was it Wesker and Birkin who made Umbrella sink even darker into evil? Part 6. Out with the old, in with the new. While Wesker and Birkin started their year of studying, Spencer took a closer interest in the management facility as a whole. The students, and Marcus in particular, were working with cutting-edge theories and the latest equipment. Arklay were not. He called in Ronald again to suggest that while the staffing situation was being sorted and Arklay was a little quiet, it would be a good time to refurbish the labs. Arklay was one of the oldest facilities belonging to Umbrella, although technically this was on Spencer's personal books. But at this point the equipment was showing its age and he had not been proactive with upgrades. They were not fit for the kind of viral research Birkin would likely end up doing. One way or another, Spencer knew that they would be creating some form of BOW, and doesn't want to slow down progress and lose out to the Ashfords, Marcus or the European team. Spencer was sick and tired of being second to the punch over and over again. Even if he wasn't that interested in BOWs, he was still determined to get a win. One of the first upgrades was to the system biology computer system, moving from KDF9 to MetaSim. All students at the management facility were using computers day to day, and to create simulations of their theories, Spencer was a little embarrassed at just how little he knew computers himself. Dave and Mike filled him in on the innovations Umbrella Technologies were making. So, out went the Xerox Altos and Xerox Park, and in came the Umbrella-owned computers with a primitive but working ROPLS 1.0 system, so the researchers could log things on a company-owned servers at Arklay with the use of IBM 3350 disk platters, all held in cooled units on floor B5. Spencer could now easily keep up with research at Arklay without having to interact with anyone. He just needed to get up to speed with modern technology. For networking, Dave and Mike, working with the Chicago team, had been deeply invested in the Ethernet movement and had decided to run with it. Spencer wanted Arklay to be the first Umbrella location to be using Ethernet, and another chance to get ahead of Marcus, Europe and the Ashfords. Spencer was Team Arklay first, Team USA second, and then everyone else after. Dave and Mike commented that although they had a steep learning curve, the company was working on something that could be upgraded on a modular level, and the ROPLs would be designed specifically for Umbrella and essentially hack-proof. These units would be installed throughout the laboratory to reduce the time researchers would need to share notes over the phone or simply by walking. The hard data would be kept in B5, but Spencer could access B5 from his study. Dave and Mike had to work incredibly hard to line the walls with cables to allow the local area network, or LAN, to reach such distances. Nobody would know they were there. While they were at it, they were able to remove the old camera system, which could only be monitored in situ, to the one which could now record. No one, outside of Spencer, Dave and Mike, were aware of their existence, and you would not be able to see them, but at any given time Spencer could see the entire complex from fixed camera angles. Floor B5 would quickly fill up with rather incriminating data, and handy that it does not appear on any map. As a side note, Dave and Mike would become so well renowned in the company that they would eventually lead Umbrella Health Technologies, which would sell and market a similar system to laboratories and hospitals all over the world. This system would make day-to-day running of a hospital or lab significantly more efficient and would save many, many lives during its implementation. And it all started in Arklay. It is beyond doubt that the shadows that Arklay cast on the world caused irreparable damage, but they did also bring a lot of positive progress along the way. The rooms off of the B3 West corridor were upgraded to have an MRI, an ultramicroscope, years before the public would get a hold of them thanks to Umbrella medical equipment. A storage room on B3 was redesigned to become a detention room. Spencer did not elaborate. The part of the lab which had to be used exclusively by Dr. Wesker and Spencer on floor B5 was completely cleared out as it had been abandoned with his departure. This massive floor was only accessible with the use of a master key and a hidden floor button in the elevator. It was essentially Spencer's private laboratory. He hardly used it. There were no records of his existence in any map, and no one with Umbrella had any knowledge of it. As designed. Floor B5 was changed to house the chief researcher's private quarters, a second private quarter, a multi-purpose private laboratory, sample rooms, a single cultivation tank, the cooled data storage unit, and a conference room. The premise of floor B5 is a place for the secrets to be kept until they could then be passed on to the consultant researchers on the regular floors. If innovations were to be made, they would be made in B5 in total secrecy so that data leaks were impossible. B5 was also made in such a way that if a viral leak was to happen in other parts of the lab, there was a contamination barrier there. In the event that the self-destruct sequence was activated, someone could hide in there and survive that precise explosion, and then escape afterwards. Floor of B5 would then have its own self-destruct sequence. Not resting there, Spencer brings over several cultivation tanks to be installed on the first floor, 2 large tanks about 10 feet tall, and several smaller tanks 7 feet tall, designed and built by Umbrella, of course. The state-of-the-art computer system would be connected to a life support system. He was tired of hearing about specimens being left to their own devices and dying quickly. This floor was to be the place where potentially viable subjects can be kept under better conditions than to be injected and locked away in the underground before they just rot and die. Up until now, Arklay was starting to be overshadowed by the other locations of Umbrella. Nobody really paid notice to it, others questioned its existence, including Spencer. Remember, the elusive Spencer of the future actually lived there for many years, which was the genuine reason for his existence. He was not there every day, but he was there as often as his schedule allowed. Part 7. Betraying the Tyrant. With the Arklay lab refurb underway, most of the team were on leave. Research on Type A, B, C and D were largely abandoned. All of the horrific experiments were destroyed and the whole place sterilised. Samples of the complex were moved temporarily before they were placed back in the labs. A fresh start was coming, and it will end up more closely resembling what S.T.A.R.S would find in 1998. Although the mansion itself would largely remain the same for its existence. Spencer was now getting frequent updates from the USS about the regular staff, and he'd also been instructed to tap up Birkin and Wesker, who were more than keen to send gossip. Spencer had, at arm's length, befriended them both and promised them a bright future in his team. Birkin was well aware that Umbrella was the company to be at, and that Spencer was the one with the real power, despite a genuine admiration of Marcus. Birkin had signalled that Marcus was close to a breakthrough with Type B. By injecting leeches, would survive and then recombine to create a new type. He had refused to work with Type C and D on the grounds that it was a Spencer project. Marcus, blinded by pride and arrogance, was unable to keep this a secret from Birkin and Wesker, unaware that they were betraying him and feeding information to Spencer by proxy. Poor Marcus believed that the arrival of these two was a godsend. He even encouraged them to be rivals to bring out the best of them. And they did become rivals, who would butter up Spencer at any opportunity. From his mansion, Spencer was drip-fed the developments, and in November of 1977, he heard the news as soon as Birkin and Wesker were able to make sense of it. James Marcus had created a new strain of progenitor dubbed the Tyrant virus. This new strain, which we now know as Prototype, did not kill the host. It turned them into something else. The Tyrant virus wasn't a modified progenitor in the same way as Type A or Type B. This was its own thing. This was bad news for Spencer. Very bad news. At board meetings, it was some time since he last contributed to Progenitor. If Marcus took this to the board, he would get an awful lot of favour and Spencer would never be able to catch up. Even as a majority shareholder, when Umbrella became a public company, Spencer was the CEO and did not have absolute power. The first thing Spencer did was tell the refurb team to work double time, for Ronald to get back into the lab and take a look at injecting leeches. Maybe Arklay could replicate it. What a terrible time for this breakthrough to have happened. Birkin and Wesker kept sending reports as November came to a close. Marcus goes from strength to strength. He hears about the Plague Crawler and the Eliminator, beasts of monstrous aggression, but they are still thinking. Strength and intelligence, incredibly wild though, unpredictable. These were never given in code names, and Spencer forbade reproducing any of Marcus's creations. They would remain at the management facility indefinitely, but he would still seek to get the embryos and the files. However, over time, their intelligence decreased rapidly and they became simply zombies. These were genuine biological weapons only weeks after the T-virus was created. His Arklay team have not even come close. Ronald and his poor attempt with leeches were getting nowhere. Lisa is still their greatest accomplishment, and that wretch is still just a prisoner with no real use. Everyone, even Spencer, was in awe of the power and speed of progress. No one batted an eyelid on which animal was next in line to be infected and analysed. Nobody questioned where these animals even came from. Just as Spencer was beginning to envision his end as the top dog of Umbrella, Marcus slips up. In a truly horrific turn of events, Spencer learns that Marcus had started using human testing subject, including his own students and even children, in the most grotesque of manners. In a conversation between Wesker and his USS contact Hugh, he spills it all. "Albert, you don't seem yourself. What's the latest?" "Hugh, sorry, it's been a long day. We don't see Marcus all that much these days. He doesn't bother teaching either. Even though he had been telling me and Birkin all about his work on T, he had suddenly become a lot more secretive." "I see. What is the latest on the Tyrant virus of his?" "I don't know exactly. Maybe nothing, but I need to tell you something and I'm not sure if this is company policy or not. I'm not even sure if I should tell you about this." "Go on." "We think Marcus is experimenting on people. We don't see them come in, but we did catch a glimpse of some going out. Some looked really small, as if they were kids. You need to keep an eye on this as a top priority. Keep your distance. I'll wait for my orders from Spencer on what to do next. Whatever he's up to, we don't want you to be compromised. I'll be in touch. You did the right thing, Albert." "Appreciate it. Be assured to tell Spencer that this came from me." Spencer, over at the mansion, got the message from Hugh, and he knew he had won. Marcus's arrogance and loose lips had betrayed him before Wesker and Birkin ever could. Marcus had willingly confided in Wesker and Birkin that he knew what he was doing was wrong. But if he was able to produce a human T-virus bioweapon, it would be enough to sway the board of directors at Umbrella to his favour and be able to gain a huge power to usurp Spencer. He thought to himself that his insubordination would be forgiven because of the T-virus. Throughout December, Spencer personally invites every single board member and executive one by one to Arklay for a banquet meal and supper, all except Edward and Marcus. These invitations were on a personal level and not work-related business. They could bring the family. Arklay was Spencer's operation after all. Spencer discusses Progenitor and meanders into the subject of Marcus. Have you met our brilliant Dr. James Marcus Sebastian while you're in town? Perhaps we could tour his facility so you can share some of his ideas. Ugh, unfortunately I have. He's a brilliant man, don't get me wrong, but he gives me the creeps. Oh, what makes you say that? Just this faraway look in his eyes. Didn't really have any interest in what we were doing, just kept talking about this virus of his. I don't think he even knew my name, or cared for that matter. Indeed, he is a little intense and come across as rude. He's been good to us, but ever since he asked about human testing and was denied, he hasn't been quite the same. I wouldn't trust that man with any life other than animals, and even that sends shivers down my spine. One by one, Spencer gauged the mood of his fellow board members, much like an exit poll during elections. This was an early Christmas present. January 1978. Marcus perfects the prototype T-virus. As snow-blanketed Berlin in January 1978, he presents all of his research to the board. An anonymous dossier was handed around the board beforehand, with details of his human experiments. Marcus is chewed up, spat out, and stamped on. In a cruel twist, Marcus would have been dismissed entirely, but Spencer pleaded with the board to limit him to exile. All research moves to Arklay. Those expensive data tapes he acquired are about to get filled. He's too dangerous to be looking for other work or be in public life, and is allowed to work at his management facility, but with his own devices and money. Mercy at the hands of Spencer. The irony. Spencer might need him again one day, if his plans with Birkin and Wesker don't quite pan out. As if by magic, or perhaps fate, Spencer had turned the Arklay complex from a holiday home and a bit of a joke within the company's science community into the wielders of the most powerful biological weapon ever created, without barely lifting a finger. Part 8. The Dream Team. The same month, Spencer brings in Wesker and Birkin over to Arklay for a proper introduction. They could glance over Marcus's unrestricted research in preparation for a potential move, to give them a chance to propose their plans to continue with it. They get a tour of the lab, and at personal risk, Spencer shows them the lab in B5. They blow him away with their plans, which was all the more impressive considering the lack of notice. They had clearly been thinking about it anyway. Now they have too much information. To not stay with Umbrella is not an option. This is high stakes for Spencer, but is pleased with the outcome. As if Spencer had planned it all along, which of course he did, he acquires all the T-virus data and uploads it to Roppels with board approval. He shares most of the files company-wide to feign cooperation and openness. What he doesn't share is that some of the human experiments Marcus conducted are also physically moved over to Arklay. He had told them they were incinerated. Spencer, Birkin and Wesker discuss an Arklay dream team, comprised of the best that Arklay had and the best the management facility had. Ronald did not play an awfully big part. Wesker and Birkin did not even think to remember his name. Birkin is quick to make it clear he felt that what Marcus was doing was brilliant and bold, and that the human testing was inevitable. He is candid about the fact that it was a shame that Spencer and Marcus couldn't work together, and it had to end like that. Birkin notes that he had sometimes worked side by side with Marcus, and mixing DNA into T-virus was something he had considered. He showed surprise that the Arklay team never came to this conclusion themselves. Spencer is not surprised. Ronald, who was in the room as this was said, becomes sheepish. He knows his time is up. This opens the door, he says, and he can see the T-virus evolution going at a rapid pace if he had the right team and equipment. With delight, Spencer takes Birkin round the currently empty labs and B5, now fully kitted out. There's an uncomfortable silence before Wesker brings up human test subjects again, as he has a vision of the ultimate bioweapon with the use of the virus over a longer incubation period. The kids are told to take 6 months off and get their affairs in order. Albert largely listens to the whole thing. He follows everything but gets the impression he will be out of his depth soon enough. Spencer unprecedentedly states the outline of the plans to the board and orders all branches to be forced to work collaboratively, share research and see each other as rivals to the same end. This delights everyone, but in reality, Spencer wanted to make the horrors they were about to do and was aware of normalised. Spencer knew everyone was keeping secrets, and now he was sanctioning it. He didn't want the board to turn on him like they did Marcus. On July 29th, 1978, Birkin becomes chief researcher at Arklay at 16 years of age. Poor Ronald disappeared quietly to Chicago. Part 9. Birkin's House of Horrors. Now stationed deep in Arklay State Laboratories, Birkin inherited the remnants of Marcus's tyrant virus work, what would come to be known as the prototype strain. But the leech-based system Marcus had championed was quickly discarded, or rather, Birkin had a burning desire to achieve the next stage on his own. Birkin considered it inelegant, primitive. What Marcus achieved was nothing short of genius, but this was just the beginning. He wanted something that had his name on it. At first, Birkin tried to replicate the prototype's effects using more conventional cellular hosts, rodents, amphibians and even reptiles. He retracted some of the steps of the old Arklay team's experiments. But the T-virus either degraded entirely or produced wild, unstable transformation. One rabbit doubled in size and collapsed from metabolic failure in under 20 minutes. A Komodo dragon suffered internal liquefaction before the virus could even replicate in its spine. Frustrated, Birkin hypothesized that the prototype strain required a specific class of enzyme, something only found in rare or highly toxic fauna. This theory led him into increasingly dangerous test subjects: cone snails, poisonous tree frogs, even giant centipedes. None yielded results. By early 1978, Birkin had pivoted toward arachnids, inspired by their venom, neurological effects and rapid cellular regeneration. It was here, with the genus of tropical spiders genetically enhanced for size and aggression, that he made his breakthrough. A specimen, later codenamed the web spinner, not only survived infection, but its venom sacs began producing new compounds seemingly synthesized by the virus itself. In post-mortem, Birkin's team extracted a radically mutated strain of the virus from its abdominal glands. This became known as the alpha strain. Make no mistake, this was a huge development. Although most people in Umbrella thought it was Birkin and his Arklay team who discovered the prototype T-virus, we know it not to be true. However, the alpha strain was all Birkin and all Arklay, and Spencer was delighted. Umbrella's original concept for the T-virus project was simple: develop a viral agent that could silently infect and eliminate an enemy population. But early trials with the Progenitor virus proved this approach infeasible, too unstable, too quick to kill, and most of all, too ecologically unpredictable, and it simply had too many survivors, and it was too hard to pre-select who the survivors were going to be. As the team at Arklay realised the environmental costs of mass infection, Umbrella's directive changed. Instead of killing populations, the virus would mutate select organisms into bioweapons, tools to hunt any survivors left behind, or to be used for military use. With a newly isolated alpha strain, Birkin's team launched this second phase in earnest. Alpha was their first viable tool for live experimentation. Whether prototype strains either killed outright or failed to take hold, Alpha offered just enough integration to mutate organic life without immediate collapse. It didn't reanimate dead tissue, there were no zombies yet, but it did enhance aggression, mass, and in rare cases, physiological strength. It was Umbrella's first crude attempt at controllable evolution. The Arklay researchers pushed Alpha to its limits. One of their earliest projects, FI-03 Neptune, involved injecting great white sharks with Alpha. The result? Only minor tissue swelling and a sharp spike in hostility, far from the super-aquatic predator they had envisioned. But it was seemingly immortal, invincible, and alive, unlike the F-01 and F-02, which were based on smaller-sized fish. On land, the team saw more promise in arthropods. A tarantula injected with alpha underwent massive cellular growth, eventually evolving the web spinner which created it in the first place. A 90-pound arachnid capable of reaching speeds of 24 miles per hour. It was fast, durable, and lethal. But it had no increased intelligence, no ability to follow commands. Like many alpha subjects, it was a wild beast, aggressive and uncontrollable. Still, the virus had clearly taken a step forward. Like the prototype strain, Alpha could produce viable, functional mutants. Now it was time to find better hosts and trying to improve the virus to keep the brain function intact. Then came Lisa Trevor. Still imprisoned in the Arklay lab after over a decade of experimentation, Lisa was the closest thing Umbrella had to a human constant. Already infected with a modified progenitor strain in the 1960s, her body had adapted to cellular abuse far beyond normal human limits. When injected with Alpha, she didn't just survive, she thrived in the sense of adapting anyway. She was still a tortured and wretched soul. Her physiologically transformed rapidly, new tumours formed, muscle density increased, bone plates began growing over her chest and back, and yet her cognitive functions, already quite fractured, remained hauntingly intact. She repeated names, scratched messages, responded to voices, clearly showing signs that she was aware of being tortured. Lisa's prolonged survival proved Alpha could function in human hosts without causing instant necrosis, but her appearance was too distorted and her mind was too unstable. She wasn't a weapon, just a warning. Alpha was powerful but still too unpredictable. It made monsters, not soldiers. And so research shifted once again. Alpha had shown the way forward, but to truly weaponize the virus, Umbrella needed something more stable, more obedient, more lethal. Rather than a virus that itself did the damage on the population, the prospect of creating soldiers' biological weapons was within reach. That next breakthrough would be the T-virus B1 strain, Beta 1, and once again, it was created by the now company-wide famous A-team from Arklay, led by Birkin and Wesker. An idea that came from Wesker was that the lethal Ebola could potentially stabilize Alpha. They received their samples in 1978, 2 years after Marcus's request. Thanks to the refurbishment, it was one of the few labs which could now safely hold it. Well worth remembering that at this point, Ebola was totally horrific, raw and public, and on par with the T-virus in terms of potential to kill, possibly more. The key difference, and why T is still the pathway, is that Ebola simply invaded and killed, whereas progenitor-based viruses have the power to change. By stabilising the Alpha strain, it could be argued that this was the birth of the BOW project in Arklay in earnest. Anything and everything were getting a dose of the Beta 1 strain. Birkin, Wesker and the whole Arklay team, to anyone outside, had gone full-on evil scientist mode. Arklay had become a sanctioned house of misery and death. They had managed to create senseless beasts. Most of the team agreed that mammals were the most likely routes to create a fully viable BOW. They started using codenames for some, although the team were very inconsistent with them. Rat experiments ended up with MA03 Rat King, a domesticated gene-modified rat which grew to over 30 inches with teeth like razor blades but with absolutely no brain function whatsoever, and therefore discarded early on. They knew if they had no brains to begin with, it was a non-starter. The team continued to refine the beta strain and the MA05 Rat Emperor, which was again a formidable beast, but the decline in intelligence was just no good. As they moved up through the mammals, focusing on intelligence, they had moderate success with cats, with the MA09 Galanthus and the MA11 Atalanta starting promising, but the small bones letting them down. They possessed much better intelligence than the rats, but physically they simply melted down and were worthless as POWs after a few days. Intelligence was still a major issue, and it was clear that skeletal strength was important to handle the muscle growth. Then along came the dogs. The first, codenamed MA-20 Fenrir, showed a huge promise as it seemed to react to sound, smells, and of course sight. They would pursue and attack without fear, with a huge tolerance of pain. The Fenrir and subsequent variations from MA-31 to MA-30 appeared to decay at a much slower rate. The team experimented by first working on the specimens, while it was uninfected, with steroids and so on. They tried various breeds along the way. Smaller and more intelligent dogs were aggressive, intelligent, but physically not a great BOW. Next, under the direction of Wesker, they started using military-trained golden retrievers as their subjects. The MA-34 Typhon being the first with resounding results, as it appeared that even after infection, the Typhon series continued to follow commands, but its destructiveness was not impressive, and its speed, or lack thereof, made it too easy to dispatch. The MA-35 to 37 improved upon slightly, working with German Shepherds. They had nailed the virus, but the breed was not quite perfection, mostly due to the breed's own flaws in terms of its hind legs failing early on. Finally, they moved on to the Doberman Pinscher, with the MA-39 Cerberus being, at the time, the crowning achievement of the Arklay labs. Fast, strong, could follow commands and worked in packs, passed with flying colours in combat tests against inanimate targets, and was swiftly approved for mass production. Is that it? Dogs? Spencer thought. Why can't we create something new? Why can't we use this beta strain to create new life entirely? Birkin would reassure him. No, it was never about the dogs. It was just getting past the first hurdle. And they had. Part 10. Hunter Seeker. In the early 1980s, the US government caught wind of the Cerberus project. And by caught wind, we mean that Spencer engineered them, finding out enough information to get in touch with Spencer. This was a black op. The official was speaking with Spencer off the record, and it will always be off the books. A meeting was conducted in the B2 projector room at Arklay under the watchful eye of Spencer, Patrick, Albert Wesker, and Birkin. Enough was shown. Their methods, the specimens, and how Umbrella disposed of them in a nearby custom-made disposal plant P1A and P2A, disguised as ordinary but fully functional factories. The story was that these were made to be able to create vaccines. The official was horrified, of course, but very interested in Arklay's future development, and they were willing to turn a blind eye so long as they could be partners and have the chance to purchase units as a discount. They were impressed at the speed of the development of the first canine specimens to the M39 mass production model, Cerberus. Behind the scenes, of course, Spencer had more or less brokered an agreement to get human test subjects over to Arklay with the knowledge of the US government. For vaccine research, of course. When the B1 strain reached a stable stage in the early 1980s, Umbrella's Arklay team had a benchmark for BOW, the Cerberus project. The infected Doberman program had produced a fast, aggressive, and relatively controllable bioweapon. Birkin's thinking was simple. If the virus could produce such results in a canine, what could be achieved if the same physiology was fused with the adaptability of a human? The first hybridization attempts used fully grown human subjects, the DNA spliced with canine genetic material before B1 infection. The results were catastrophic. Test subjects developed elongated jaws and canine-like teeth, but the process warped their skeletons beyond functionality. Limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Muscle growth was uneven, and spinal deformities left mostly unable to stand upright. Worse still, cerebral degeneration was extreme. Subjects quickly lost coherent thought, becoming feral, incoherent predators that lashed out at anything in reach. These abominations were deemed failures in terms of combat viability, but they generated critical data on viral compatibility, skeletal stress thresholds, and the limits of B1's mutagenic stability in hybrids. One of the earliest attempts considered worth recording was designated MA-54 Anubis. While still heavily flawed, its movements were erratic and it could only respond to the most basic stimuli. The Anubis displayed enough stability to survive extended observation. The data gathered from MA54's growth patterns, tissue resilience, and neurological decay became a foundation for future hybrid experiments. With those findings in hand, Birkin's team turned once more to the most enduring subject, Lisa Trevor. Already an amalgamation of viral strains and decades of cruel experimentation, Lisa's physiology offered a unique environment to test B1's bonding capabilities. The strain was administered alongside tissue samples derived from the Anubis project, allowing researchers to compare and refine integration rates. While Lisa's mutations were grotesque and uncontrollable, her uncanny resilience yielded invaluable insights into how B1 could be coaxed into forming more stable permanent bonds with host tissue. A breakthrough that would inform every BOW project to come. The failures made one truth painfully clear. Direct canine-human hybrids were a dead end. If Umbrella wanted an intelligent, controllable human-based BOW, they would need a different genetic partner. Birkin's gazed, turned next, to the reptilian. By the mid-1980s, William Birkin's refinements to the T virus produced a major leap forward. The B2 strain. More stable, more predictable, and far more efficient at integrating foreign genetic data. B2 opened the door to a new line of experimentation. The Arklay team's next genetic partner was the reptilian kingdom, chosen for its natural durability, predatory instincts, and regenerative capacity. The early trials still used fully grown human subjects, in part because adult anatomy allowed research to monitor rapid viral and genetic integration without waiting years for maturation. The results were startling. Reptilian DNA introduced through B2 not only stemmed the extreme necrosis that plagued early hybrids like the MA39 Cerberus or the Anubis, but also endowed subjects with sharpened claws, enhanced binocular vision, and a degree of predatory agility that surpassed anything the project had yet achieved. Perhaps more importantly, the B2 reptilian pairing seemed to stabilize natural degradation. Unlike the mindless ferocity of the MA54 Anubis, these test subjects retained a surprising level of intelligence. They could recognize handlers, follow basic verbal commands, and even exhibit problem-solving behaviors during containment exercises. For the first time, Birkin had a prototype that hinted at combat viability. Making a single viable experiment took a long time, months, and the incubation tanks were becoming busy. One would go in, and then a month later they would be ready to make another in the next tank. But there was a flaw. Adult physiology offered no room for controlled growth. The virus could only work with what was already there, resulting in particularly integrated hybrids that were functional but not optimal. The proportions were uneven, musculature often mismatched to skeletal changes, and the long-term survival rates were limited. Birkin, frustrated but driven, began cycling through subjects at an alarming rate, pushing for results faster than his team could fully document. This reckless pace caught the attention of Albert Wesker, who was increasingly concerned about the waste of resources and about Birkin's state of mind. At the same time, across the pond, Alexia Ashford made headlines with an umbrella by becoming the youngest chief researcher in company history at just 10 years old, assuming control of the Antarctic base. Birkin, already prone to competitive arrogance, took the news poorly. His focus sharpened into an obsession to prove that his BOW program could produce results to eclipse anything Alexia could achieve. What followed was not the triumphant march Birkin had envisioned, but 2 years of stalled ambition. Between 1981 and 1983, the Arklay labs became a graveyard of failed concepts. The reptilian trials continued, but progress was erratic and easily derailed. The BT2 strain offered stability on paper, yet the hybrids it produced in this period were uneven at best. Musculature that promised strength buckled under its own weight. Vision tuned for predation degraded into blindness within weeks. Birkin's notebook swelled with test logs, but viable combat units remained stubbornly out of reach. His frustration drove him to scatter his focus. If reptiles could not yet deliver the breakthrough, perhaps another genetic source might. In those lost years, anything that crossed the threshold of the Arklay facility was fair game for viral pairing. Fish for their gill efficiency, arachnids for their tensile strength, even common houseflies to study their compound vision. The results were grotesque curiosities rather than weapons. Swollen amphibian torsos that could not survive outside water, web-spinning mammals whose silk glands ruptured internally, and insect-human amalgams that collapsed before maturity. Each failure added more noise to the project's already sprawling data, and the reptilian program suffered for it. Wesker's patience wore thin. Resources bled away, test subjects were wasted, and Birkin's fixation on matching or surpassing Alexia Ashford's achievements clouded his judgment. When word reached Arklay in late 1983 that Alexia had perished in Antarctica, Birkin's composure returned, but so too did Wesker's intervention. Trials were scaled back, the more erratic experiments shelves, the focus realigned on making B2 and the reptilian DNA, aka the Hunter program, work in tandem. For now, the Hunter concept was still only an ambition, but the failure of these 2 wasted years would quietly arm Birkin with the knowledge to make his next leap forward. Part 11. Birth of a Tyrant. As the Hunter project entered its critical middle years, the pace of experiments by Arklay shifted. Gone were the days of reckless mass testing. The team became more patient, more precise, turning the focus only toward embryo stage experiments, carefully nurturing viral integrations from the earliest stages of development. This meticulous approach promised greater stability, but progress was slow and required far fewer specimens. Every success was hard-won. The government were pleased and could see the Seekers eventually becoming useful in combat, but not yet. While the Hunter-Seeker research plodded forward, the Arklay B team exploded with creativity and monstrosity. They engineered abominations like the Chimera, a grotesque fusion of human and fly DNA powered by the evolving T-virus. These experiments kept Umbrella's disposal plants busy with creatures of all shapes and sizes. Some newspapers were picking up the connections of homeless people, especially women, going missing in the Arklay area. Spencer had started to weave himself into City Hall and the police, and he had ordered that the team acquire specimens elsewhere for the time being. Amid this carnage, a quiet story unfolded. Annette Smith, more measured and relaxed than many in the lab, joined the team in 1984. Calm nature brought a needed balance to William Birkin's fierce ambition. They married in 1985. And a twisted set of events held the after-party in Arklay Mansion. In 1986, their daughter Sherry was born, a fragile new life amid the shadows of viral horrors, a reminder of humanity in a place dominated by monstrosity. At the same time, the team retired the problematic FiO3 Neptune, disposing of the existing stock to make way for another exact specimen. This new line included pups, showing promise for better control and adaptability. A small step toward Umbrella's dream of bioengineered weapons that could be deployed with precision. Yet, despite these advances, the ultimate goal remained clouded. Deliberately, Spencer's influence was not so strong in Arklay. He was happy with his lot on Project Wesker, and he believed Birkin and Wesker would achieve things on their own. After all, he was now a billionaire several times over and had a monstrous corporation to take care of. By 1988, the Arklay team achieved the creation of the MA-100 Seeker, a future Hunter variant, far more stable than previous models. It demonstrated greater physical resilience and combat capability, but intelligence was still lacking. The Seeker was not quite as fast or strong as the lab envisioned, still unpredictable for mass production. But now, every single specimen survived infection through their methods. The end result may not have been there, but they were close to a perfect Hunter and mass production. Umbrella's ambitions demanded more by the board. They were hungry. The Seeker was a stepping stone, not the final prize. Behind closed doors, the whispers of the Tyrant project began to take form. A vision for a bioweapon with unmatched power and control, though its full realization was years away. The seeds were planted here in the mid-1980s as researchers wrestled with the limitations of the T-virus and sought new breakthroughs. Thanks to the Hunter program and decades of data, Wesker had pondered what it would take to create the ultimate life form. A human they could manipulate to become a god, with the use of the T-virus, growth hormones, and a specially created tank to nurture over time. Why bother with the reptilian DNA? Why not find the perfect genetic human and take him to the next level? Initially, the goals of the Tyrant virus changed from a virus that could clean the population to being used to create monsters that would hunt and kill the survivors. Now it was competing against Project Wesker, but in a different way, a lab-grown god. Birkin thinks he can do it, Wesker thinks they can do it. The board are in their honeymoon period with the pair of them, and thus the Tyrant project was approved, with day-to-day running of the Hunter program handed over. But there was a catch. Spencer needed Birkin and Wesker to both plead allegiance to him by revisiting their old mentor Marcus, who had been left to his own devices still at the training facility. The two of them confirmed their path to the dark side by killing him. Spencer now had full control of the pair of them, and evidence of their treachery if they were to ever cross him. Not realizing how the single act was the beginning of the end of Umbrella, there was no turning back for them now. Also in 1988, one of Umbrella's biggest years, the Arklay team received a mysterious parasite sample from Umbrella's European branch. Its true nature and purpose remained a secret, one that would later ripple through Umbrella's darkest projects. For now, it was another enigma to be studied. But for the team at Arklay, all that mattered now was the Tyrant. In the next episode, Tyranny's End, we explore how the Dream Team at Arklay pursue their goal of creating the Tyrant in the bowels of the Arklay Mansion. William Birkin's obsession with Golgotha, Albert Wesker's departure, and how Lord Spencer's betrayals come back to haunt him. This has been Shadows of Arklay, Origins of a Madhouse.